Hello and welcome to this seventh video in the Bhagavad Gita Reflections on Chapter 16 series. If you haven't already, please take a look. It's in the YouTube list for these series of videos. There's an introductory video explaining kind of what's behind this. And there are also the 6 videos previous to this one. So in the interest of time today, we'll assume that you have done that and that you are somewhat familiar with where I'm going with these and how this works. That said, you would also be familiar with the fact that it's generally considered useful to not have every activity kind of run into the activity before it, like cars piled up on the freeway. So what we are practicing, and certainly in this day and age, there's a lot more of these exercises. I call the exercise from the School of Practical Philosophy, which is where I first heard of this. And I think at the time that the school was started in New York in the 1960s, the idea of coming to rest and pausing and meditation and all that stuff was not in the everyday vocabulary. Now there's probably 10,000 websites where you can learn how to come to rest or what have you. So that I leave for your own looking about. But for the meantime, we're just going to keep it simple here. Eyes open or closed, it doesn't matter. Usually better closed because as we just did control the senses previous, there's less distraction that way. So let's just come to rest here, being aware of the fact that you actually have a body, aware of it sitting in the chair or standing or wherever you are, and just let all the cares go. Well, good. Certainly while we're in this portion of rest, if you want a little bit longer time, hit the video on pause, come to rest, really let the stuff go. Depends upon when you are watching these. Beginning of the day would probably be better. We have less stuff going then. But by all means, if you need a couple of minutes, just go ahead and hit that pause button. Now, we're going to continue right along. We are still in the first verse, although nearing the end of it. And we just got, the past 2 videos were on the second line of it, which was Dhanam and Dhammas, which were giving, and here self-restraint, control of the senses is how we talked about it. Now the next phrase, we actually have 2 phrases, and this is going to be interesting because I was a bit stymied on these. Normally when you read these, when we had fearlessness and purity of being or giving, it really, there's a lot to talk about. It's well within our experience. However, when I got to, the word in Sanskrit is yajna, okay, or yagna, depending upon your pronunciation, I was, the one word translation is worship. And let's just first take a look, as we've been doing, at some of the other translations. So for yajna, we have worship, devotion, prayer, praise, act of worship or devotion, offering, oblation, sacrifice. At the root of these is the root yaj. Okay. And that root is given in meaning as to worship, adore, honor, especially with sacrifice or oblations, to consecrate, hallow, and offer. We have secondary definitions also of to present, grant, yield, or bestow. And I think just in hearing those, that we'll get to some of those. Now, the yajna is followed by swadhyaya, which is loosely translated as study of one's own scriptures. Now, the reason I was a little stumped here with these is both of these are not I'm going to say depending, but both of these are not really, for most people, in their day-to-day. I mean, if there were any worship and study of scriptures, at least Western culture, which is largely Christian-based, such a thing would occur on Sundays or on holy days. But the general idea, as near as I can tell, and I'm going by kind of my upbringing, the only times where this would ever come in would be when one was going to a church or some ceremony that was church-based. Now, I'm going to contrast it, and I'm not saying that every Eastern house is the same, but for example, it would not be unusual in India to find some sort of home altar, a place of being able to say prayers, either before the start of the day, when you come home, or what have you. Outside of that, I don't know how widespread the practice is, but certainly in India it would not be unusual. In fact, I think it would probably be about the norm. So, what is this separation that comes about in two of the world's major religions? Why is it that this idea of worship and scriptural study is not a daily occurrence, and in yet other parts or other religions it is? And I mean, again, the Gita would be Hinduism. There are clearly other religions that do in fact call for daily prayer, or prayer multiple times of the day, which is both a study of scripture and a form of worship. So how did we get to this point? I'm not sure, mainly because I wasn't really thinking about it even in terms of when, because looking at these, it was really, well, what do these words bring up? But just in this short time, the first thing that it brings up is how integrated are these things into your life? And I think the answer to that really depends on where you are and how you were brought up. Is it possible I'll switch back to Western and Christianity, is it possible that every day there is in fact some sort of devotion, some sort of worship, some sort of praise, and also scriptural study? Well, the one thing that comes to mind immediately is, let's say, a monastery, or actually the church itself. So if I were a priest or a reverend or a minister or whatever the title is that goes with it in a Christian organization, I would expect that there is in fact daily worship and devotion and study. If nothing else, the job itself brings that. Certainly the Catholic Church, and I have to speak from my experience there, would have Mass during the weekdays, maybe 1 or 2 in the morning, possibly in the evening, but generally a morning service where people could come. So it is not completely absent in Christianity, but the idea of, I can, again, speaking from experience, there is no friend's home who I've ever gone into who I know is Christian where I would see a little altar set up or a place to do some prayers before the day starts. Very likely to see a cross hanging on the wall, a picture of Jesus or something like that, kind of as a reminder, but I really don't think that this kind of daily and the daily worship that we're talking about here occurs. Whether it does or not, is, having said all this, is rather irrelevant, because one could easily be praying at home or at a church, a synagogue, a mosque, or whatever, and be totally out of it, no matter what the actual place you're at. And so I think the first thing when we talk about worship and devotion and prayer is we once again come back to the state of the heart, the purity of the being. When this devotion or this prayer is, or worship is being given, what is your state? Now, sad to say, just from my bringing up, and I don't know what confession looks like now in the Catholic Church, but after confessing your horrible sins of the week, the priest would give you, say, 5 Our Fathers and 3 Hail Marys and who knows what else. And of course, you rush out there to say them and just kind of get them done. I would not put that down as what the Gita is indicating here. I think what we're talking about is, if you will, a state of being relating to what you know of yourself and what you know of the Creator. Whether it's, again, everybody takes how they got here from a different way. I'll try to keep it safe and say Creator, however you view that. But in some way or another, it's not too far of a stretch to realize, hey, you really didn't do much to get here. Here you are, sitting here in a chair, reading some stuff and what have you. And if I can go back to the 3 promises that we talked about, to remember the Creator, discover and obey the natural laws of the creation, and return to the Creator, that gives you a hint of where we're going here with worship and prayer. And as I say, the one thing that keeps coming through just about every one of these words is they really point to, although they're called the godly qualities or the spirituality and materialism here, whatever they're called, they are a pointer in a direction. Go east, go west, go south, go north. These are pointers in a direction. So I talked about last video, pointing inward, upward, within, closer to the heart of your being, the treasure chest. And so there is saying prayers to, get things done, to get your obligation over with. But I would hardly call that devoted. Now, the one thing about kind of doing this off the cuff is a lot of these words around worship. I actually had to go back to the English version and say, okay, much that we didn't have that problem with knowing. Do you know that? And there's usually a simple answer. Yeah, I know that. I know how to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. No, I don't know how to build a rocket ship. Worship, I actually really didn't know, well, what is intended by that. And just as I look down here and we talked about devotion, also another word. Now, we can certainly understand being devoted to. We talk about being devoted to our spouses, our children, our jobs, all of these things that we are in contact with daily in the world. Now, in looking up worship before, there were 2 main definitions. And the first one, not surprisingly, relates to how do you relate to some deity or divine being. Since the since divine beings and God is not a very popular thought process right now, or an idea, we'll leave that. I am in no way coming here and saying, you should believe in God, you should this and that. Everybody has to come to their own understanding of how they arrived on this planet, what it means to be here, what it means to either do good or evil, and so on down the line. But worship in its first definition is generally a human, a created being, if you will, acknowledging, adoring, and devoted to that being who they believe was responsible for their being here. The second definition that came out of the English was taking almost that same thing, but applying it to a superstar singer, a basketball, football player. It all had to do with that same devotion turned to a particular person who was in some way either the inspiration or your hero or someone you worship. It is, I understand the use. I'm not sure that even if you were, quote, worshiping singer X or football player Y, that despite what the dictionary says, that it comes from the same place. And yet, just to think about it, you in some way worship because, let's say it's just your favorite singer, you, one, are appreciative of the talents of that singer. I'll just stick with singers for now. You're appreciative of the talent of that singer, and you might want to be like that person. For those who watch the Voice, they always bring in a mentor who everybody goes, oh wow, Taylor Swift, or whoever it was, and this year it was James Taylor, where the people come in and they go, there is a person who has something that I would like to have, whether it's and maybe they don't even go that far. Maybe they just really are truly appreciative of the talents, of the gifts that singer has. Most of the cases, though, they do want to in some way emulate, aspire to. Now, the slight difficulty we have is nobody has any trouble as long as it's another human being they can see on this planet. I can only refer you to George Carlin. Just go out there and YouTube anything that he has to say about God and religion. I think his attitude probably covers 90% of, I'm going to, again, say America, or at least Christianity, okay? But how many of us, let's even say for the other 10% who, while not necessarily believing in somebody, sitting on a cloud, white robe and long white beard and stuff, how many of us, for whatever our Creator means, however we have arrived here, whether it's even if it's just a more natural thing, even if it's just nature itself, there's a certain reverence and awe that is inspiring just in the planets and the galaxies and the fish in the sea and the other animals on the planet. It's all amazing, but how many of us take the time to give that kind of devotion, that kind of praise, that kind of worship to the creation itself or the Creator, and then even aspire to have some of those qualities, which really brings us back to, why am I sitting here and doing these things? If they're called the godly qualities, A, okay, what are they? B, what does reflection on them bring? C, do you think that they're useful at all? This is where I keep coming back. When I hit the pause button here and I bring these back and do whatever right now minimal editing, which is just put the two of them together and get a card out there. But when I come back and I look at them again, I am yet to have understood why people do not consider goodness a desirable thing. Mainly because whether it's this video or anybody there, almost immediately an objection comes up, and I've said this before, that's not the real world, you don't know, life is not like that. It's a real pushback. Now, it may be, and I try to shorten this, I said this before, it may be, you're living a tough life, you just got laid off, where's the mortgage going to be paid from, where's the rent going to be paid from? The question is, aside from that, is there any benefit to sitting here reading off of the godly qualities? Is there any benefit to devotion, prayer, praise of whatever is higher in you? I think I have to come up with a good phrase, because again, if I say God, that's got 50 different meanings, and I'll have 1,000 comments about God, pro and against, and all that sort of stuff. So, let's just say something higher than yourself. And I've been wondering where this story was going to fit in. Carl Reiner, who just passed away probably a couple of weeks ago from the taping of this video, and Mel Brooks, who at least as of now is still with us, back in the 1960s, did a wonderful routine, The 2,000-Year-Old Man. Mel Brooks played the 2,000-year-old man. Carl Reiner was the interviewer. And naturally enough, in all that time, there was a lot to ask about. And Carl Reiner asks Mel Brooks, the 2,000-year-old man, well, what about religion? He says, we had religion right from the beginning. I said, really? He says, yes. Well, and so you knew God? He says, well, we had Phil. Phil was our God. He said, really? Well, we prayed to Phil every day. Oh, please, Phil. No, he was big guy. Please, Phil, don't hurt us. Okay? That was what we knew of religion and worship and praise and that. So what happened? He says, then one day, a big rock fell from the sky and it killed Phil. We all looked around and said, there's something bigger than Phil. Now, that's just to lighten the mood up here, okay? Whatever it is, and it could be Phil, maybe that's what we'll call him, Phil, from now on. Whatever it is. Now, and again, and all of these are for the fact that you just don't think that you are, the cat's meow, are self-created, self-sufficient, nothing needed, thank you, from no deities or what have you. I would say that even if you don't believe that, I would like to see you, as they say, do without the air and the water and the light and whatever else is provided. The fact of the matter is we can't survive in these bodies without a little outside help. So at whatever level that is, it could be this much above, I'm trying to get this much above, or it could be all the way up to whatever your idea of God is. But in some way or another, as humans, there should be a natural draw to worship and devotion, prayer and praise at whatever level that is. Okay? Again, if you, I've been reading ahead. I mean, if you are the type that, as I said, all sufficient unto yourself, good luck with that, the day that the sun goes out or whatever. But, really more practically, most people, the day-to-day does take our attention and our cares. But if there is, in fact, some time in our day, some way of reflecting, some way of stopping for just even a moment or two and say, okay, be thankful. Give some praise, give some worship to whatever that level is. Are you going to become a saint overnight? No, I'm not too sure from what I've heard about the saints that I would want to anyway, but just a chance for a different point of view, a chance for you to ask yourself, Is life all that rotten and miserable? Because I got to tell you, maybe I just need to stop reading the comments on Fox News or something like that. But you talk to everybody and or listen or read those comments, excuse me, and it's a sewer pit. And I wonder, is that the day-to-day experience? And the question I pose is, if so, why? The second question is there any way of looking at it differently? My suggestion in this series is, well, here's a bunch of words. Here's some stuff that's been said by a pretty good authority. And here's what I've seen. And, it may do something for you. It may not. But, like anything else, I think it really needs to get its due in its time. I will have no trouble going out on the internet and finding as much hate as is out there. I don't want to say that the world needs, but I certainly would have no trouble finding people saying foul and cruel things about each other. That we seem to have in abundance. The question is, could we get to the point where there is an abundance of worship, devotion, prayer, attentiveness to the world around us, to our fellow travelers on this planet? I don't know if that's possible on a large scale, but as it's said, you start where you are. And where I'm starting here is, let's see if these words have any meaning, if they have any effect, and if they are useful to anybody. And if they're not, they're not. But I would at least like to make the attempt to put out a different sound, a non-hateful sound. We're going to get to akrodha, absence of hate. There's something that's really needed. Can we have an absence of hate for a while? Well, we'll see. So we're going to leave. We'll leave this at the end of part 1 right now. I'll take the few moments that I always do to reflect on what was said, take a quick look through the video, see some of the points, and come back to the material here. So until we get to part 2, just we'll see you in a few minutes. Hello, and welcome back to part 2 of this video. We are looking at worship. Just from the way that the first half went, we'll have to take swadhyaya, study of one's own scriptures, as a video unto itself. As I say, I look through these, I am not always sure how they're going to play out. And honestly, when you're looking at a piece of paper and it only says worship and you have to look up the English definition of it, you think, well, how can one talk for a half hour on that subject? And of course, we just did. The one thing I'd like to come back to, and again, it is not a hallmark of Western civilization, or again, I tend to equate Christianity with Western civilization, but the idea of having some place in your house where it is a sacred place. Now, and I don't mean a man cave, okay? Although honestly, that's just as well if that's how you, if you will, get away from it all and calm down. But I'm more thinking about, some area where even if you're just walking by it every day, there's a reminder that whether it makes you stop, whether it turns your attention outward, whether it makes your actions more full of devotion or worship, whatever the case is, just that reminder. Now, judging by all of the advertisements I get on YouTube, there are also a number of apps that could do the same thing. Personally, I have enough trouble with the phone, despite the fact that I've been in computers all these years. But certainly, just a beautiful little corner. It could be the end table in your den or something like that. So why am I suggesting that? Again, as a reminder, in much the same way that this video series is a reminder to kind of look up every once in a while. I mean, I think I'm probably going to want like 5 cameras on my car just to be able to navigate the streets around here, because most people are, you know, either on their phone, checking the radio, yelling at the kids in the back. It's a wonder the accident rate isn't higher than it is. But my point about that is, it is necessary to look up. It is necessary to look out. It is necessary to be reminded that you are not the be-all and end-all of this world. You are part of your fellow travelers journeying here. And, you know, when we talked about truth and honesty and wisdom and coming from the heart and purity of being, this is really an extension of it. You don't, you know, I mean, if you go to church on Sunday or synagogue on Saturday, a wonderful, beautiful thing. And if you are in tune and attending and not, you know, checking off the clock to see when am I going to get out of here, that's a help towards kind of inner cleansing, as we also talked about. But it's that there is almost nothing in our day-to-day existence, unless you do happen to be a rabbi or a priest or you know, someone in that position. There is, in general, for most of us, you know, whether I'm a ditch digger, a cashier, as I said, computer programming, whatever it is, there is not a lot in our day-to-day that causes us to look outward. And that, again, this is not to say that any of this is bad. It is necessary to go to jobs so that people, you know, so you can eat and your kids can eat and what have you. Where we're going and what this whole series is about is that necessarily what you need to do for, I'll say 16 hours a day. I think 8 hours is recommended on sleep or whatever, but is toiling in the field, as it were, the only thing that your eyes get to see and that your ears get to hear? Is that your entire life? And if so, is there a possibility of, whether it's just, you know, I mean, I've so far, the grand advertisement for these videos, I sometimes put them on, and as is the case, you know, even with other videos, you know, it can put you out. It just, you know, because it is just a talking, we're not, other than the reading from Screw Tape yesterday, there is not a lot of, you know, thrashing about and, you know, booms and Star Wars soundtrack in this. But it is still a different place than where we are most of the time. And, you know, for myself, the answer to is it useful is, I think so. I've been amazed at what the reflection upon on these words are. And as I said, we're only on 3, 4, 5. We're only about, you know, 7 words into this first verse. We still have 2 more to go. And if nothing else, and I think I'm going to have to end this series with a video that's kind of a lessons learned, as we would say at work, of what came up. I mean, I will assure you that I had no idea coming into this how much time we were going to spend on, you know, or how quickly, I would just say both time and quickly, we were going to get to the heart. Because again, for most people, that's a rather abstract concept for them. In other, I'm not going to read you the whole of the book, but, you know, in other the Screw Tape letters, you know, his advice to his tempter is, you know, whenever you hear heart, you make the humans think of Valentine's candy and little kitty cats and puppy dogs and stuff like that. You would never ever, if you're kind of trying to push people away from goodness, you never ever want them to think of the heart as, if you will, where the strength comes from. And similar things could be done with the mind. But, here I thought that just by looking at worship and devotion, that, well, that's going to take us to a different place. And it took us to a few different places. But in the end, what seems to have happened just in these first few words is it still comes back to, they may be called the godly qualities, but it is up to us to manifest them. And the first way to manifest them is to hear about them. And I don't believe, and certainly if the case is that you are regularly hearing this, consider yourself in a very blessed state of being. But for most people, what they are hearing is A, rather harsh, and B, again, kind of downplaying what it means to be a human being. And so if nothing else, other than maybe giving me a chance to hone my public speaking skills a bit, but if nothing else, it is a sound that, A, we do not hear very often. It is a sound that I believe is very useful, if nothing else, to counter all the rather hateful sounds that are out there. And B, it's the chance to take a look and ask yourselves questions. 2 seconds before you take your last breath is hardly the time to say, I should have. And a life well lived, a life where people say, gee, I miss him or her because of what they brought, because of the love that they brought, because of the happiness, because of the joy that they brought to those around them. At least again, and I have to, it's a shame, I will hope that the day comes that I don't have to keep saying, in my opinion, in front of this. But the first thing is to get people to agree that there are such things as good qualities and that they may be useful. And I may yet be amazed for the next 30, 40, 50 years that somehow or another people do not think, and will vehemently oppose almost everything that's written down here. It's a shame. It has convinced me, though, as we're going through this, that I will, and it's going to have to be a different series, but I am going to have to do the demonic qualities, mainly because I need to kind of ask the same question. Now, what Krishna does here in giving these qualities is he's, first of all, trying to set the stage, and you always put the best forward, right? You put the best stuff out. And then when people raise their hand and say, yeah, but you don't know the real world and this and that, and you don't know how tough life is and all these things, then we can kind of take a look at that. But you start with the best. You start with the finest. And so we're going to start here. We'll leave it for another series. Maybe that series you'll find a little bit too close to your heart and say, really? Okay. But for the moment, let us just consider that the thrust and the way that it seems to be continuing here is that you start with cleansing of the heart, cleansing of the mind follows, and we seem to be pretty good right now about cleaning everything else with the COVID-19. I'm never quite sure what to call it at this point, but again, it is certainly useful to work from the physical inward, but the best way is to work from the inward on outward. And so I'm going to leave it at that, because we will, I think I have to get what the next number is, but the next video will go on to Swadhyaya, which is reciting or repeating or rehearsing to oneself. In this case, since we're coming from the Gita, it's recitation of the Veda. That would be the Upanishads, the Gita, and other things. The important point there is, and I really have to reflect on that, there's a great emphasis that when this is done, that you stay within kind of your scriptural authority. So we'll leave that one for because I have to reflect upon that a little more. I've heard some stuff about it. Obviously, I am, talk about practicing what you preach. I am not doing that now because I do jump all over the place on these. But let's see, we'll leave that for the next video. Meantime, as I say at the end of every one of these videos, if this is not to your taste, there's plenty of cat videos out on the internet. So enjoy. Until next time.